Hi, welcome to Reframe, which is a project out of the Restorative Wellness Response Project that is all about body reclamation. And it's really designed to help us think through the ways in which we can pursue self care as a form of resistance to racial injustice. My name is Janelle Austin, and I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm going to kick it off to my buddy Don, who's a co-co-founder. Wait, co-founder, co-co-founder.
Yeah.
He's also a co-founder. Y'all got what I'm saying. Hey.
Thanks, Janelle. Yeah, we're really excited to bring you guys Reframe. It's something that we've had to kind of adapt to with COVID. We had self-care fairs. We've had multiple different versions of what this is, but we're really excited to bring this version now. So just to reiterate kind of what Janelle said, just a form of resistance through self-care.
Wonderful. And my name is Tabitha Montgomery. I have the pleasure of partnering with Don and Janelle, and I also serve the Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association. And I would really just love to say that we are super excited to get started with having a really intentional conversation with our guests today. So I'm saying bye to Janelle and Don so that we can kind of really put the focus on our guest. And then we will be able to move on. So just give me 1 second. All right, so we're back. Thank you for that small allowance for that small break. We have two amazing artists and community partners and wellness practitioners with us today. Wing Young Huie, who is a celebrated photographer, and Minkara Tizete, who is an artistic practitioner, a griot of psychology and psychiatry that will be helping us to really drive this first conversation. We're going to try to keep it moving quickly because we have a really precious 30 minutes, but we think that we can explore a lot in this 30 minutes together. We are able to see our faces, hear our voices, and just really bring you into this space. One of the things that we're hoping to do today is just kind of look at some of the intersectionality or the connections, the layers of how arts and wellness practice really informs and influence self-care or health or wellness for an individual. And so without any further ado, we definitely want to make sure we say thank you to Wing, thank you Minkara to being with us today. And our first 10 minutes or so, everyone, we're going to be focused on the topic of what is essential. So this is to our guests. So, for the past, you both over decades have experience in your respective artistic and wellness practices. As we consider and think about the wide range of trials and awakenings that have taken place over the past 12 months, would just love to hear from you both about how you might describe why photography and psychology/psychiatry are essential not only maybe for you, but are essential for community. And maybe Minkara, I'm going to start with you and see if you can kind of pull us along into that conversation.
Sure. Thank you for having me. First of all, Tabitha and Wing, it's nice to meet you. My title officially is the Griot of Psychology and Psychiatry at the Cultural Wellness Center in Minneapolis. And I think the thing that comes up for me in terms of what is essential in these times is really remembering a couple of things. One is telling yourself the truth and being able to face the truth in a way that allows for you to recover from facing it. So the truth of the matter is we are in a time where at this present day, close to 400,000 people have died from COVID. We saw a televised, what some people are calling an execution or a lynching on every streaming platform that's available to mankind that has sparked really a global movement around consciousness about how do people care for themselves and what does that matter. So I would say like the thing that comes up for me, what's essential right now is on Monday, I actually lost my father to COVID. My mother died 3 years ago to the day yesterday from breast cancer. And so tragedy and loss are a part of our daily life. But we live in a world that doesn't acknowledge it, can't acknowledge it, and really isn't able to face the harshness of it because we live in a world that focuses on the surface. Practicing ancient arts, practicing wisdom techniques requires that you look at the world in a different way. It requires that you use the heart as your primary, I'm not going to spell Wing's language, but it requires you to use the heart as the primary lens from which you articulate and express to the world. So for me as a griot, what I've begun to do several years ago is really practice the art of like what I call Tizete, or listening to my own heart, trying to allow the divine presence to be articulated through my sitting with myself and taking time to just reflect on what I'm thinking and feeling. So that's what I would say is essential. People have to get to a place where they can grieve and mourn in a way that allows for them to see that there is resource and not just loss. So the loss of my parents is a resource to our community. It's a loss to me in a physical, emotional sense, but what it does is it provides for me a wellspring from which I can say to community people, recovery really does look well. It looks like your ability to spend time meditating, weeping if you need to, crying if you need to, but at the same time, realizing that you're not broken because you're experiencing emotions. You're not broken because you're in the moment, really facing a very difficult and challenging reality. That's what I would say.
Well, one, thank you for that insight and that perspective. And before we move right over to Wing and give him an opportunity to answer that, please know that on behalf of myself and everyone who's listening and being a part of this session, our deepest condolences for your most recent loss. And certainly we hope that the memories are more sweet than bitter and that you're kind to yourself in this journey.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you so much. And I don't want to come off as sacrificing, because I think the thing that my mother taught me prior to her leaving the physical body was that our life is a prayer. And Elder Atum will articulate this, who's the founder of the Cultural Wellness Center. Our life is a prayer, and our work is to become the expression of that, whether it's sorrow, peace, happiness, joy, whatever the quintessential element that is attempting to teach us our humanness, the spirit of humanity. We have to listen to it, because weeping is the most ancient of ancestors. You know what I mean? You have to place yourself in what we consider to be knowledge. And so as weeping as a practice, women wept from the biblical times and before, because it was a way of demonstrating and articulating what it meant to live with pain and suffering, but not to be detached from it. You know what I mean? Because after we weep, we dance, you know? So but we don't consider them practices or art forms anymore, because they are simply emotional emoting that happens as a result of socialization and social existence. So now that sounds so dry, right?
Not at all. I'm definitely picking up that you telling us to embrace what needs to be released. I mean, there is not one emotion for me that what you just said is something that we should fear, right? Something for us to own and not let own us. So I think that there's a lot of heart in that. Wing, so I'm just going to kind of restate what the idea was. And so when we think about all the trials and all the awakenings, because I definitely think that it was been a duality. It's not just been certainly the suffering of the magnitude of loss or the magnitude of disinformation and the impacts on our in systems and structures, but there has been clearly these awakenings, not only locally, but globally. Like we can make the case in terms of maybe a recommitment to the conversation or idea of justice in all of its forms and for every single human being and environment and animal and species, really. So wondering, when you think about your artistic practice, your art form, what for you would you describe as essential when we think about photography?
One thing I just want to jump on what Minkara said. I really appreciate sharing, and also deep condolences for your loss. I say that because I am the essential caregiver for my sister, who is in assisted living, and they will receive the first vaccination next Wednesday. And so, yeah, and I think it's, yeah, so really, really thinking about my family. As a photographer, I have photographed thousands of people from all walks of life. And I'm not that friendly. I'm not unfriendly. I'm just like anyone. And photographing people, and almost all the people that I photograph, I talk to first. I introduce myself and hear their story. And so I get outside of my own bubble, outside of my own personal, cultural, and technological bubble. And I'm always confronted by my assumptions. And the people are people. And in getting their perspectives. A lot of what I do in schools, I think I've done public exhibitions. I did a 4-mile, I did a photograph for 4 years, a couple thousand people that in the neighborhoods connected by Lake Street, and had a 6-mile exhibition, and put photographs up and down 6 miles and made it into a public gallery. And it's all the photographs that already exist that we consume on a daily basis from pop culture and main culture do not reflect all the people are looking at them. So I think that the biggest impact that I have is in schools. And when I tell students that I have photographed thousands of strangers, for the most part, especially 6th graders, but really all ages, they all go, "That's creepy." And then I ask, how many of you feel that you are a stranger to many, if not most, of the people in your own neighborhood or to your fellow students? Most raise their hands. And so having them, I give them assignments to photograph each other and tell each other's stories and try to understand their perspectives. And so I feel that connecting with other people, especially in this extreme polarization, it's essential to try to understand each other's perspectives. And for students who most of what I'm doing is virtual, and the challenges for schools, for teachers, and for students to learn virtually and be in front of a screen all day long, they all want to be back in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And as one student said to me, what do you miss most? I miss the classroom. I miss the cafeteria. I miss the chaos where everyone's talking over each other. And so direct interaction. We take photographs of each other every day in our minds, and how much of the reality that we impose, the perceptions that we impose on the reality in front of us, how much of that is shaped by all of those images, mass culture, social media, and how much of how we see each other and ourselves has to do with direct interaction. If we knew each other's stories and perspectives, how much would that help?
So you both just shared something that I think is truly not only profound, but it's not on what I would call that surface level of engagement between connections between people. So Minkara, you lifted up this idea of cultural practice. There are things that we do that we have so forgotten that it's a part of the human experience. It's a practice. It's weeping is in many ways medicinal, so that we can get to the leaping and the joy. And then Wing, even in your depiction of first in introducing yourself and listening actually to someone's story as a part of capturing an image. I'm just wondering, maybe if you both could kind of share a thought or two around why it feels, or it seemed that it was easier for us as a collective community to think about caregiving, right, which is immensely important. My mother is a caregiver for my father, who recently had a stroke. So certainly I'm right there with you, Wing, and just in so many other people where health is top of mind. But why do you think it's so much easier in our community for us to think about that behavior as essential versus this idea of introducing ourselves to someone we don't know, caring about someone else's narrative that we don't know, a stranger, in fact. And then also this idea of embracing the full range of emotion, Minkara, as a form of practice to understanding yourself or even wellness.
I would start by just reminding myself that Janelle started with this idea that self-care as resistance. And so I think part of what comes up for me in your question really does point me back to just a basic idea that people, because we've been, I think in some ways, indoctrinated to only look at the outside world, we don't venture internally. And so I think what people call artistic practices are really internal journeys. So from a cultural wellness lens, from a cultural wellness perspective, from that field of study, we would say that all people have language. Your script connects you to creation. So the photographer and Wing's, and this is me as the griot of psychology and psychiatry, Wing as a photographer is attempting to capture nature in its raw form so that when we want to remember the spirit of humanity, we can turn to the photograph and look at human spirit. And we can say, oh, there's the human spirit, and that's what it looks like. Because we don't talk in those terms, because we live in a world that focuses primarily on the object of the picture. Is the picture valuable? Can we sell the picture? And does anybody even care that Wing is taking pictures of thousands of people? That seems weird to sixth graders. Like, does that even matter anywhere? And so where we have to anchor that is, it does matter because Wing is practicing an art produced by his people. And his people have produced this art form so that his presence on the planet can be valued. The value of his presence, not his people's presence, the value of his presence demonstrates the value his people have placed in his gift to take images of other people. We are here to demonstrate the power of the lens, his people said. And as we demonstrate the power of the lens, Wing is here to articulate that for us. And we give him full authority and responsibility and authorization to do that on our behalf. That's what knowledge holders do. That's what quote unquote artists are. They are knowledge holders. We've reduced art to consumption, which is what we've reduced life to. We've reduced life to numbers. So my dad is 1 in 400,000, but him being 1 in 400,000 doesn't take the pain of him being the one father that I have away. So that's what we've done. But when we see 400,000 on the news, we don't think of my best friend's mother's grandmother who died. We don't think of my grandmother who has COVID. We don't think of my aunt. We just think, oh, that's 400,000 people. We see a pile of bodies, but we don't see the spirit of humanity aching and asking us to work together so that we can heal. Self-care is about reimagining what it means to live together as human beings. I do this to care for myself, and I'm gonna sit here and practice this. If you choose to, you can come and sit and practice this with me. That is what Wing is offering to the students in the school. He's saying, we are offering this as a practice to heal humanity. That's what writing is for me. That's what picking up the paintbrush has become for me. It is a practice of meditating and focusing on the spirit, focusing on the rising of the Ka, to allow human beings to get back to a place where we are connected to the divine presence in creation. I'm gonna keep saying that, where we're connected to the divine presence in creation. And when Wing sees a picture of a beautiful African girl at 8 years old, he is seeing himself. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I feel that talking to people, whether they're strangers or someone you know really well, or to a therapist, talking in a real way is a form of social therapy. And I really appreciate, you know, it makes me think, you know, it's illuminating for me, the idea of what you're trying to do with a cultural wellness as a field of study. And talking about your father and about culture. I was everyone in my family was born in China. And except me, I was born and raised in Duluth. And I was always the only Asian kid in school. I was the only Asian kid in elementary school and middle school. And in high school, finally this Asian student showed up at my school. When I saw him, I avoided him. And I think it was because I thought I was like everyone else, but I stuck out. And when I saw him, I was seeing myself for the first time. I thought he stuck out and I didn't want to stick out. And I didn't really consciously think about it until years later. After I became a photographer, I started thinking, you know, what am I? And the start of my career was photographing my father. And I didn't know my father very well. And all the stories he told about being in China were just stories to me. I was formed by American culture. I was formed by pop culture. At home, I spoke my mother's native dialect. 台山話 my mother never learned to speak English. And once I started school, my English got better and my Chinese got worse. So it was difficult to even talk to my own mother. And so photographing my father for my first published article after graduating college, that was the start of my career. And I have photographed thousands of strangers since then, but photographing all of those strangers, not unlike photographing my father, it was the most intimate experience I had with my own father. It helped me to understand him. And then 10 years ago, for the first time in my life, I went to China. And I was confronted by my Minnesotaness and my Americanness and what I thought was my lack of Chineseness. And I felt a lot of cultural guilt my whole life. And so connecting with your own culture, going there and understanding it more, rather than growing up in America and having people come up to you and say, you know, geez, your English is really good. How come, you know, or things like that. And so I think that really helped me to accept what I am and not have others dictate what they think I am.
Wow. Definitely in the chat, you know, Janelle is saying powerful. And there's so many aspects of that, right, that I commiserate with. Like, just for me, what comes up is this idea of often I'm told you're so articulate. And, you know, I need to do some work on that because you know, on the one hand, it has never felt truly like a compliment. And yet I've not necessarily dealt for myself with why, you know, because it's been easier to be on the surface. I've decided that that was not an essential conversation to have, but there's something that is in the person who is attempting to give a compliment in their assumptions about my culture and my people, and whether or not we should at any point in time be able to string together sentences in this English language in a way that might compel them or convince them or persuade them in some fashion. So, you know, I appreciate the fact that even through this conversation, as a part of wellness, is understanding some of the things that I want to work on, right? Just through the lens of both of you. So the second topic is in kind of in this idea of the theme of this series of reframing. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, and even if you're not wanting to give a number, that's totally fine. But on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being optimal, how valuable for one's self-care or wellness is the images we take in and how we're accountable to what we think? You know, if we think about taking care of ourselves, is it a small thing or is it a big thing to be aware of, conscious of, critically thinking about the images that we take in and or what we actually believe as an individual? Wing, I'm going to ask you maybe to start with that. How would you respond to that question?
I asked students, of all the images you've seen, and your generation have seen more images than any other generation in the history of the world, what percentage of them do you think are real? Or what percentage of them do you think are authentic? And what is your definition of authenticity? For the most part, they go, maybe 90% are not real. You know, it's digital, virtual, filtered reality. So what is real? Oh, maybe the photographs in my family album. Or sometimes a student will say, they're all real. They're all fake too. And then I ask them, how much do all of those images that you consume on a daily basis, how much do they shape your idea of the world versus direct interaction? And for the most part, they go, most of how I look at the world has to do with those images. So you're saying how you look at the world is based on images you don't even believe, but there's so many of them. That's our reality. That's where we are. And who makes those images? People who have the most power.
What about you, Minkara? So, I mean, I think that what Wing in his response brings up is just how delicate, you know, how fragile really, how important, what I took away from that is the things that we're seeing, right? Because inadvertently, whether it's fake or not, it is shaping and influencing what we believe or even what we would willingly process, right? So what about that comes up for you, and not only the images, but how important is it for us to really be accountable to what we think? Because one of the other things that's happening, of course, in the social media space is it feels like there's absolutely no cost to share an opinion. You know, it's a very low bar. It's, you know, a low cost of entry. So what do you think about that, Minkara?
I'm gonna try and be succinct because Wing just broke open all this stuff for me. So I'm gonna tell you what I wrote down, and I'll try and be succinct. Reality is not real. So the question that comes up for me is, what happens when reality is not real? When you can't tangibly connect to reality, when nature, creation no longer is tangible. You can go outside and literally hug a tree, but it's not a reality. Like, you can't imagine yourself touching creation in a way that's so real. You'll get a puppy and rub it, or a kitten and hold it, but you won't be in nature. So I think part of what comes up for me is, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being optimal, people need images of themselves in order to feel whole. So what Wing describes is feeling isolated and alone without having consciousness of the despair that it produced for him as an elementary school student, because I don't speak the language of my heart, my mother. Yeah, see, my heart is my mother. I don't speak the language of my heart. It's been eroded away. The images that I take of the world are my father, and I don't know that story. I don't know the story of my father, my homeland, my mother's people, my father's people, because I've been extracted from my people, placed in a society that does not value my face. And so when I see my face, I run from it because my face doesn't feel familiar to me. And in fact, alienates me even more. So I go through life attempting to raise my spirit by taking images of other spirits, other people's faces, in order to recover my own humanity. That's art. That's what art is. That's the practice of art. And capturing the face is an ancient African practice that goes back to Kemet. When they scribe the images of the pharaoh, when they scribe the images of creation, when they scribe the first letters that were created by the creator, the bird and the bee and the tree, into the walls so that it would imprint on your mind the creator's image of you. You are a divine spark created in creation to reproduce itself and to reproduce the knowledge of consciousness that comes through you. That's what the artist does. Do we get credit for that? Not really, because we get put into a category of consumption and consumerism versus what you should do with knowledge, which is savor it, appreciate it, place real value in it. So you can, so like my journal for the month is done already. I got to start a new journal for January. I still 7 days left, but that's how much pain I have. And it is the way of me articulating that I'm not going to leave this pain on the earth unresolved. I'm going to resolve it through my listening to my heart's utterance, my weeping. I'm going to listen to my mourning and my crying, not so that I can be depressed, but so that my spirit can rise. I'm going to continue to, again, use that spirit rising, because as my spirit rises, as our spirit rises, the divine presence that is weaving our artistic, creative human stories together is really giving birth to the capacity for us to really build community and shift and reframe what's currently on the planet. And that's really our work, is to shift and reframe by studying ourselves. Wing is better, I'm better, because somebody allowed us permission to really go into ourselves and not have to answer for that and not have to apologize for, I'm not good at math or English, but I'm a writer and I'm a poet and I own a publishing company. But I'm convinced that if I study it, other people will too, and we will get out of this because of that practice. Does that make sense?
Beyond the, you know, I think that for me, both of what you shared, and I just want to acknowledge that we're so close here on time, and I'd provide an opportunity if you would indulge if there's any final comments. But I think that what really stands out what really stands out about what you've both shared about not only you as individuals in your practice, is just how it's clear that you are not separate from parts of the things that contribute to the beauty that you put in the world. Like you are so immersed, if that makes sense, in some of the skills and the talents and the way of being that you navigate this world, which I think is able to produce these ways of deep reflective thinking, right? And I think that that's a takeaway for me, is in terms of being so connected to yourself, that you are always very much interested in, you know, what am I doing? How am I using my voice? How am I using my lens and my talent to actually, in some ways, not be in control, but support in the community in a way that really is about bringing my best self forward to the degree that we're able. So any closing thoughts that either of you have about really, I would say just the broad construct of maintaining ourselves, being well in these very sometimes uncertain times, chaotic times, beautiful times, as we navigate space together? What kind of comes up for you there?
Just a final comment. One of those assignments I give students, I call it the culture assignment. And I have them define culture, because sometimes a lot of students say, I don't have a culture. Well, the idea is culture is all around you. So during this time of COVID, I have them interview someone where they live, their family, and to find out a story you did not know. Mm. And so many come back and they talk to their parents and they say, they find out things they didn't know. And it's like, how come you never told me this? And the parent says, because you didn't ask.
Wow. So. What about you, Minkara? Any final thoughts or words that you would share?
Yeah, I think in closing, I would just say the most important aspect of the work that any of us can do to really affect the human condition is really learn how to tell ourselves the truth about our own condition. I think Wing and I both, I think, attempted to do that. And I think you joined us in that, Tabitha, is really attempting to say, I can't produce anything without the story that's attached to my being. Everything that I do in this life is a reflection of all the lives that have attempted to raise me up, you know. So no Black boy has joy without a Black man's pain. It's just the way it is. Excuse me. It's just not, it's not a real thing. It doesn't exist separate from each other. So the tragedy that you see in my face at the present moment, and also the joy that I want to express, cannot be separate from each other. They are one side of the two sides of the same coin, and you cannot have beautiful articulation without the spirit having endured, the soul having endured. This is the repeat of our existence. This is not, you know, it's not like, this is not new. So each day is your heart has to shed a layer each day in order to face the pain in this reality, because this reality is real. And when you look in your face, when you look at an image of your own face, you cannot deny your own pain and suffering. So people turn away. So people look in the mirror and they turn away. And I say to people, you have to practice looking in the mirror. You have to practice watching yourself wipe away the tear, so that when it shows up, you acknowledge that it's there. I'm acknowledging that there is an ancestor saying to me right now, thank you so much. You are our prayer answered. So Hotep, and thank you so much for this platform.
No, you both have just again enriched this conversation so much. I can't thank you enough on behalf of the Restorative Wellness Project, and just the nuggets and the wisdom that you just kind of shared in this space, and really just shared of yourself about how important it is to know reality and know truth for yourself. Don't hide from it. Be willing to engage in life, introduce yourself, share space with other human beings. And certainly, I just think how we hold and understand truth really takes so much of us being intentional about our moments that we're given, and not just the good moments, but the trials and the awakenings, the good and the bad, hardships and the joys, the ups and the downs. And so Minkara, I thank you so much for certainly enriching that seed and Wing, all the work that you do with encouraging young folks and old folks to really think about who they're seeing and why they're seeing them and what stories they know and what stories they don't. We appreciate you each deeply, and thank you for sharing in today's conversation. To all of those who joined us today and will listen to this recording in the future, we appreciate you and your time for this 30-minute, hopefully what was an explosion of encouragement and inspiration from two local treasures that we've had an opportunity to spend a little bit of time with today. So thank you, and until next time, as we have our next Reframe conversation, be well.